Welcome, everybody, to CUGH's ongoing webinar series. My name is Keith Martin, and I'm the Executive Director of CUGH. We are the world's largest consortium of academic institutions and other organizations around the world involved in improving the health of people and the planet. And we work across research, education, service, and advocacy. So if you'd like to have a little more information about CUGH, please feel free to look at our website at cugh.org. Today's webinar is going to be on how to get your research published, tips and guidance for academic writing. And we are delighted today to have the editor of the Lancet Global Health, Ms. Zoe Mullan, to be giving this presentation today. Zoe is also a CUGH board member. So Zoe, who's in London, thank you very much for doing this, and I'll hand it over to you. But for everybody, just bear in mind that Zoe will be speaking for about 30 minutes. There'll be questions and answers to the top of the hour. So please submit your questions in the question box that you'll see on your screen. Zoe, thanks again for joining us, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Keith. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Slightly daunted. I think there are an awful lot of people out there, so I'm very gratified that you've all made the effort to come along today. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. Keith's allowed me to indulge myself a little bit by talking a tiny bit about Lancet Global Health itself. Then I'll quickly move on to what editors of leading journals look for. So I'm going to be talking mainly about the high impact journals. Those are the ones we all want to publish in. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some insider tips about how to get your work noticed by editors from such journals. Spend a little bit of time on basic manuscript structure. I won't go into too much detail, but just something to think about when you think about those editors reading your papers, how you need the stuff you need to get in there in order to grab editors' attention. And then I thought I'd just talk a little bit about predatory journals, because I think this is a big issue. It's a very hot topic, and I've had lots of questions about it in the past. So to end, I'll just put a few slides together on how to avoid predators. And then, as Keith mentioned, we'll have some Q&A. So very briefly, the Lancet Global Health was launched in 2013. It's now publishing 8 research articles every month. We're an online-only journal because we're open access. So most open access journals tend to be, because we don't have any paid subscribers. It's all free to access online. We do have more than 100,000 free subscribers, so you can sign up to receive our table of contents alerts. That's how you find out what's happening in the journal, rather than getting it through the post. So if you want to go and sign up for those alerts, please go to the journal website. We've got quite a lot of Twitter followers now and an impact factor of 17. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. This is a journal I launched 5 years ago, and I hope you've seen some of the papers that we've published. We're very lucky enough to receive. So moving on to what editors of leading journals look for. I'm going to begin with the flow chart of doom. This is a basic, very sort of simplified flow of what a manuscript's journey at the Lancet. This is the Lancet main journal now I'm talking about, which receives 9,000 or so articles for publication every year. We can't publish all those 9,000, so there's a sort of various stages of triage that the papers go through in order to get to the bottom accepted box there, of which there are only 4% of those original 9,000. So the first stage will be very, very quickly weeded out by the deputy editor, and that's on a very, very high level. Is it right for the journal level? And I'll go into a little bit of that in a second. Then it will go down through various levels of being dissected before it even goes to peer review, and then of course the peer reviewers will take a look at it too. So I won't go too much into that flow chart there, because it's quite specific for the Lancet, but just to get an idea of what you're sort of up against when you're trying to compete with others for editors' attention. So this top level triage, this is the So this is what the deputy editor or the editor-in-chief would look at when they're first looking through all the papers that have been submitted. And essentially, it's whether or not the paper is relevant to the readership. It's nothing to do with how good the paper is, how good the methods are, how important the topic is. It's whether it's actually relevant to that journal. And that's entirely an editorial decision. You know, the aims and scope have been set out by the editors, and that's, you know, that's how we shape the journal. So the first thing to do, obviously, is to read the aims and scope and information for authors. If you don't do that, then you've really kind of wasted your time if you've submitted something that's not in scope. So I've just pasted here the Lancet Global Health's aims and scope. So we state that we publish original research, commentary, and correspondence. So when someone submits a paper and says, well, it doesn't really fit any of your categories, it's kind of a more free-flowing review type article, it's around 6,000 words long, you know, would you like to publish it? My answer is going to be, unfortunately, no, because we said we don't publish that type of article. So so really have a look at the website, see which type of article that a journal publishes, and if they don't publish the type of the article that you have, just choose another journal. It just saves some time for both of us. And then again, the scope. So if someone submits me a paper and it's about mice, then I'm going to say no. It's not for Lancet Global Health. It might be a perfectly good paper, but it's not within our scope. So that's a very, very simple thing. First thing to do: read the instructions for authors and the aims and scope of the article. Then it's talking about standing out from the crowd. Those 9,000 submissions that come in. For a high impact journal, we want to know what's new. It's very important, especially in the basic sciences, to reproduce other people's work. Very important. But when a high impact journal, especially a high impact clinical journal, will be looking for something that's not just repeating what someone else has done. So we would want to be seeing a new treatment or prevention technique, perhaps, or if it's not a new treatment, is it in a population that it hasn't been shown to work in before? Maybe it's never been shown to work in children and you've done it in children. Great. We might want to be looking at new knowledge of disease distribution, so some epidemiology that hasn't been shown before, or perhaps some new knowledge about the future, a modeling study. What always makes an editor's heart sink slightly is when you conclude that these findings confirm the work of somebody else. So, as I said, it's very important to reproduce work sometimes, but if you're looking for a high impact journal, if your bottom line is that actually it just confirms what somebody else has already told us, then it probably isn't going to be one that's going to stand out from the crowd. The next level down, if it's past those two levels, then we'd be looking for a deeper dive into the methodology. So we'll want to see that you have an adequate sample size, so you've got enough statistical power to be answering the question you're asking. We will be looking at the study design to see if it's a comparison study, whether you've got adequate controls. Maybe if it's a questionnaire study, is that questionnaire validated in the population that you're looking at? And if it's a modeling study, maybe are those assumptions that you've used in that modeling study sound assumptions? And then we'd also be looking for a paper that was quite generalizable. Again, for a high impact journal, for something like the Lancet with a very general readership, we'd be looking for some conclusions that could go beyond the specific population that you've actually done the study in. And I've just popped at the bottom there the sort of hierarchy of methodologies. So systematic reviews, randomized trials, those things obviously are high level evidence, and then the observational cohort and case control studies are getting less the sorts of things that we'd be looking at in a high impact journal. Case reports and expert opinions would probably go to a different journal. Okay, and then the next level down, we just want to be reassured. Once we'd got, we were reassured about the methodology, we just want to make sure that you'd reported it. adequately. So in that paper, we'd be looking for a statement about ethics approval. If it wasn't there, we would not necessarily reject the paper, but we would go back and ask why it isn't there. The same goes for informed consent. If there are patients involved, we want to see that informed consent has been attained. For a randomized trial, we'd be looking for registration in a trial registry ahead of recruitment, ahead of the first patient recruitment into the trial. And this still doesn't happen. We see this from, not just institutions that maybe don't know these rules so well, but from top institutions in the US still not registering randomized trials ahead of recruitment. And this is a reason for rejection now in a high impact journal. If you send a trial that has not been pre-registered, it will be rejected from a top journal. So again, not something that's too hard to do, but you just have to remember to do it ahead of that first patient entering into the trial. And then adherence to reporting guidelines. So there's this really, really useful website called the Equator Network. And as it says there, it really is your one-stop shop for writing and publishing high-impact health research. So again, there's no excuse really for not knowing how to write your paper up in the best way once you've got the basics right. So this website will give you all sorts of guidelines on all sorts of study types. So for randomized trials, you have the consort guidelines, observational studies, the Strobe guidelines, and they're really quite detailed and structured guidelines on how to get your paper in the very best shape, so that an editor will be able to find all the things they need to know about the study and to be able to make an informed decision. So again, no excuse for not going to that website, getting the appropriate reporting guideline and just writing your paper up to make it as good as possible in the eyes of an editor who's going to try and assess it. And then really, I think what an editor's looking for is something it's quite definitive. Probably it's going to be the last word in something. So maybe some other studies have been done on this topic, but maybe this is the largest one that's been done. It's adequately powered to actually say, no, this we definitely know now that this is the case. There've been some smaller studies, they've been sort of slightly uncertain, but this is now as definitive. And that doesn't need to necessarily be a positive conclusion. We can have a definitive negative, and I think probably the Lancet Global Health has published more negative trials than positive ones. So it's fine to have a negative outcome if it's an important negative. If it's something that we shouldn't be doing, that is as important to know as something that we should be doing. So a top journal will absolutely not reject your paper if the finding is negative. So don't try and spin it so that to make it positive if it isn't. And another thing that makes editors' hearts sink somewhat is the more research is needed conclusion. So more research is always needed, but I think if your main conclusion is that we haven't moved much further forward on the basis of this paper, we need to do more. Again, that's not really going to attract the attention of a top editor. So put it in if it's really the case, but it might put an editor off. So in conclusion, what an editor is looking for is an answer to a relevant question in an important population in the appropriate way at an opportune time. We want to get to the end of the paper and understand why you did it, why you bothered to do this piece of research, and kind of so what. Essentially, we're looking for a missing piece in the puzzle. And that missing piece in the puzzle brings me to this slide, which introduces the Lancet reward initiative. And this initiative was put together with these collaborators listed here. It stands for Reduce Research Waste and Reward Diligence. And it was really to, and I think, again, this is essentially for biomedical research. Why do a study that someone's already done? You know, these are real people's lives we're talking about here. It's real, you know, public money often. Why do something that is answering a question that we could actually answer using the evidence that's already available? So Lancet's very keen on looking at avoiding research waste and publishing something that fills a needed gap. So this, these statements are taken from the article at the bottom there by Ian Chalmers and Paul Glaziou, and they published this viewpoints, which was setting up the case for the reward programme. And they state that an efficient system of research should address health problems of importance to populations and the interventions and outcomes considered important by patients and clinicians. New research should not be done unless, at the time it's initiated, the questions it proposes to address cannot be answered satisfactorily with existing evidence. That's essentially what we're looking for in a paper. And they went as far as to say that up to 85% of research they thought was probably a waste of time, money, and patients' goodwill. So we do take that seriously. So it's not just us being fussy and elitist. We want to know that the work that's been done has been worthwhile and not a waste, all those things. So as part of this program, we actually now ask for authors to submit with their article this thing called a research in context panel. And it's basically directing an editor to the incomplete jigsaw. So we ask authors to put together, essentially to do a systematic review, to put together all the existing evidence. So this section should include a description of all the evidence the authors considered before undertaking the study, to make sure and to show to us that that your research was worth doing and had not already been done. Then it should, the next part of the panel should describe how the findings that you found add to the existing evidence, and then what the implications of those are. So now I'm going to move on to basic manuscript structure. And this is the flow of most biomedical journals that you're probably familiar with, the IMRAD structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And essentially what we're looking for when we're reading through a manuscript is to get a sense of a story. So we want to know what is the problem, what's already been done as part of that research in context, and an explanation of why this particular study needed doing. We need to be very clear about that. Then we need to know exactly what you did to be able to understand it. So to be able to, you know, follow that story, and then to have the results refer back to the methods and have them presented in a logical order. And then the discussion: what is the bottom line? What are the limitations, context, and what next? And I'll go into some of these in a bit more detail now, but that was just the main outline. So for a title, we're looking for something that's informative but concise. So not waffly, but gives you enough understanding to be able to sort of draw you in, at least to the abstract, and to take a deeper look into the article. So it needs to adequately describe the content, and particularly the study design. So it's very important, and all those reporting guidelines that I mentioned earlier will always state that you must put the study design in the title, so perhaps after a colon at the end. And try not to use technical jargon and rarely used abbreviations. It's really difficult to read when there are lots of abbreviations, and often, especially for a very, very general medical audience, some abbreviations can mean different things. So to be very clear, just spell everything out, apart from maybe the very obvious things like HIV, and no jargon. Then the abstract. I can't really emphasize the importance of the abstract enough. Sometimes it is actually the only thing the editor reads, because if they get the impression from the abstract that actually the paper isn't for them, they may not read any further. So it's really, really important to get that right. It's usually written last, so write the whole paper first, and then go and do the abstract based on the outline that you have in the manuscript. And that thing is then usually read first. So it needs to accurately reflect the paper, Again, abbreviations are not helpful because they interrupt the flow of what you're reading, and sometimes they can stand for different things and can be confusing. The aim must be stated really clearly. Again, the editor's looking for that what's the point thing. And there needs to be enough detail for a new reader to be able to follow what you did without having to refer necessarily to the rest of the paper. So it's a good idea to probably to show your abstract to somebody outside your specialty to see whether they can understand it. It's useful to put some actual data into the findings part. Don't just say something got higher or lower. And then to confidently state the implications of the work. Again, we want to know what's the point, but also it's important not to overinterpret the results. So the methods and results section, as I briefly mentioned, the point really is that they have to refer backwards and forwards to each other. So if we see a method described, we want to see the result of that in the results section, and vice versa. We don't want to see a result that we haven't had the method described for, because that doesn't give us confidence in the overall quality of the work. As I might have mentioned already, refer to those reporting guidelines. So look at the Equator website, which has guidance for all manner of different designs of study, including qualitative. Only report the investigations done in the current study. Don't confuse us with things you did before or intend to do in the future. And then avoid interpretation or speculation in these sections. That comes in the discussion. So the discussion, again, very important, and it's best to begin by summing up the main findings, just to remind us what you did and why, the relevance to existing work, again, and if there is some existing work out there, but your work conflicts with that, it's a really good idea to try and explore why, because an editor and a reviewer is going to naturally want to know why that is. So it's a good idea to try and preempt that. The same with limitations. It's really important. Every study has limitations, so it's important to be upfront about those, because reviewers are only going to ask for them later. Then do mention the strengths. Again, you're trying to set your work apart, standing out from the crowd. And really important not to introduce findings that aren't mentioned in the results and the methods, because again, that's very confusing, and again gives us a slight worry about the quality of this overall study. Don't include statements that go beyond what the results can report, and then do finish with the implications and what should happen next, and trying to avoid that further research needed fallback. So the general principles then of a manuscript from an editor's point of view is to find out what is the point? Why have you done this, and what does it mean? To basically be told a story, so to be led through from start to finish, to know that you've referred to reporting guidelines so that everything that's in there that we need to know is there. And I think it's a good thing to state that we don't worry about perfect English. So if a manuscript is not written perfectly, but it's understandable, so we can understand what you did, that is fine. We have editors in-house who can polish the English. So again, it's a good idea maybe to get a colleague or a friend to read the paper to make sure that they can actually understand what you did before submitting it. Important to choose the journal wisely, so do study the journal's information for authors, have a look at what's already been published, and don't submit things that don't fit into any of the categories that the journal publishes. And then so finally, beware of those predatory journals. We'll talk about those now. So we've all probably had one of these emails. Dear Dr. Zoe Mullan, we're inviting a limited group of scientists who've made promising contributions in the field of nursing and care research. I've never done that, so I think it's unlikely that they've seen my work, but they're inviting me to submit it anyway. So we've all had these emails, and some of them are quite convincing, some of them are tempting, and I know probably some of you have been trapped by these predators in chief, as this article so aptly called them. So these are, for those who are not in the know, a predatory journal is an open access journal generally that exists really to make money. So you submit your paper, you pay your fee to have it published. There's essentially very, very little in the way of peer review. If anything, the paper gets posted, or actually it may not get posted. They may just take the money. It may get posted on a very inferior website. The website may be there one week, it may not be there the next week. So they're essentially sort of cash cows for the people that are setting them up, and they need to be carefully avoided. Luckily, help is at hand. This was a white paper published by the World Association of Medical Editors a little while ago, and these are some warning signs. So these are taken directly, these bullet points are taken directly from the paper you'll see there. If the website of this journal doesn't mention peer review, it's likely they are really not doing any of it. They're a bit cagey about the editor-in-chief and the editorial board. Doesn't really give many details about them. They either publish an extremely small or extremely large number of articles each year. You get these strange emails that are formulaic or very badly worded and are maybe not relevant to your subject area. These journals tend to promise turnaround times that are completely unbelievable and are very, very unlikely to incorporate decent peer review. And sometimes these journals actually try and poach the names of real journals. So they'll make themselves a name that's very similar to a known established journal with a good reputation and try and trick people into submitting to it. So it's very important to do a little bit of digging. It won't take too long, but it's really important to do that extra bit of work to make sure you don't get trapped by these things. There's also a website called Think, Check, Submit, which has it's a very, very basic checklist. But again, it's worth just having that extra few minutes just to run through and check the journal you're submitting to is really a legitimate journal. So you could ask yourself, have you ever heard of it before? Have you ever read any of the journals, the articles in the journal? Would you want your paper to be associated with any of these articles? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? Or is that a bit hidden? Can you find the journal in any of the index services that you use? And is it clear how fees will be charged? Is it clear what the fee is? Have you heard of any of the editorial board? Maybe you could try and email one of them and see whether they really are on that board, or whether, as happens quite often, known researchers have their names attached to these journals without having any knowledge that they're actually supposedly on the editorial board. Also, you could check out whether these editorial board mention the journal on their own websites. And then there are various industry recognized initiatives like the Committee on Publication Ethics and the Directory of Open Access Journals that you can go and search the journal on their list of members, and that's a very good indication that the journal might be okay. So that's the end of my talk. I think what I want people to take away really is that there are an awful lot of resources out there. So if you are floundering a little bit for how to get that paper structured and how to start your research from scratch, there's a lot of research out there, help out there. So the Equator Network, as I've mentioned, is a very good one. Think, Check, Submit for choosing your journal. And Elsevier has this Researcher Academy, which has all sorts of very useful documents on it. There are more free webinars, and it's all available completely free. So yes, use the resources out there, and good luck. So I'm going to hand now back to Keith for some Q&A. Thank you very much.
Presentation, and we've got a lot of questions here. Before we just go to the questions, if I could ask you just briefly, if you could share with the audience of groups around the world. We have more than 300 groups around the world watching this right now. What are the commonest mistakes that you see as the editor of the Lancet Global Health that people make?
I think it's a mixture of all the things that I've mentioned to you there. It's people submitting papers that actually aren't relevant to the audience of the journal. So the author probably just hasn't read the aims and scope well enough. They are badly reported trials or unregistered trials. So it may be a great subject that we really want to support, but the trial hasn't been pre-registered, and these are really basic errors that should not really be made anymore. I think those are probably the main ones, and just not making clear what the manuscript is adding to the body of knowledge out there already.
Great, thank you. So Yogan has a question for you. And Yogan says that the toughest part to understand from the questioner are what the editors considers relevant for readership, and sometimes novel things are not considered relevant. What's your advice with regard to this?
So novelty versus relevance. I think again, it's always a good idea to just go to the journal and look at the stuff that's been published already. That will give you a very good idea of the types of study that people publish. And yeah, novelty. I think if it's novel, then it will be very attractive, and that's probably more important than the subject to an extent. I mean, if it was a very novel mouse study, I still wouldn't publish it. But I don't know. I think if you've got something that's novel, it's worth submitting. So that's probably my advice. Or emailing the editor to see whether it would be in scope rather than going through the whole submission process.
Fantastic. Now we have a few questions about qualitative research, and Julie and Charlotte and others would like to really know, are qualitative and quantitative research projects, are they equally valued by editors?
I think, speaking from a Lancet editor's point of view, we very seldom publish qualitative research, and I don't think it's because we see it as lower in value. I think it's very complementary to the qualitative work that we publish. Our main problem is that we get a very high volume of qualitative research, and over the years we've built up an expertise in assessing that work. And we have a big reviewer network for quantitative research, and so we're actually not geared up to give qualitative work the type of assessment that it deserves. So so though we say we don't tend to publish much qualitative research, that isn't because we don't value it. It's just that, again, it's not something we've historically done, and our readership is expecting to see in one of the Lancet journals. So again, there are some great journals out there that would publish more in the way of qualitative research, and so your attention should probably go straight to them rather than a Lancet journal, because it's just not something we've done, and we're not really we don't have the expertise to assess the papers really.
Great. Ioma sends this question in, Zoe, about medical education, medical health education work. And Ioma wants to know, we've been speaking a lot about clinical trial type studies and manuscripts, and the questioner wants to know how medical health education work is viewed for publication by journals.
Yeah, again, I think the Lancet journals probably, it's difficult to see a really meaty research paper on a medical education topic, but what we are interested in those topics, and would probably tend to publish them more as a sort of short report. So they wouldn't be considered in our full research article section, because you would be up against big trials and things, and so it would be difficult to see those kind of making the same kind of grade. But the topic is very important, and so yeah, we would probably publish something that was more in the way of a sort of a commentary or a small report that we would publish in a kind of abbreviated form as maybe correspondence or a comment. But yeah, no, good topics, but maybe not as a big standard original research paper.
Thank you, Zoe. This is just to Gulam and Ginny, who are asking questions about how to recognize predatory journals. I just ask you to please look at Zoe's presentation, which will be on CUGH's website, cugh.org, by tomorrow evening. So please look at that. And then Zoe did a wonderful job at being able to distinguish how you can distinguish a predatory journal from a non-predatory journal. And she put up a number of sites that you can reference that where there's an awful lot more information that will help you to do that. So Zoe, the question here from Charla is she wants to know that people who are lesser known, new researchers, what tips do you have for a new researcher that would enable them to have a good chance of getting published versus those who may be better known?
Well, I get asked this question quite a lot. It's how, we kind of see always see the same names in these top journals there. You editors must just look at the names of who's submitting and think, oh, I don't know that person, and kind of just discard their paper. But I always find that kind of disheartening, because we don't do that. I mean, we genuinely try and look at each manuscript on its own merit. We don't look at them blind. I mean, maybe we should start looking at them blind, because we really want to be encouraging new researchers. And so the advice I would give is to really try and follow my advice in this talk, which is to just try and make your paper stand out. I don't think there's anything you can really do as a new researcher to persuade an editor to publish it as a as likely fashion as a very well-known researcher. You just have to look at this advice and make your paper stand out. And we can assure you that even if we don't know your name, then if the paper stands out to us, then that's what we're interested in, not the name. It's the content of the paper.
Just for everybody online to know that the Lancet Global Health sponsors a student poster competition at the CUGH conference every year. The next conference will be on March 8th to 10th in Chicago, 2019. March 7th will be the satellite session. So please stay tuned, because in May the 15th, the website for CUGH 2019 will be open. You'll have a chance to submit your abstracts, and Zoe and others will be part of adjudicating that process. And it's a wonderful competition that the Lancet Global Health under Zoe's leadership has sponsored for quite a few years now. So please take a look at that. At CUGH, we also set up a different section for both undergraduates so that your posters can actually have prominence at the conference. And we also create space for researchers from low to middle income countries too, in our oral abstracts. So just know that we're trying to create space, greater space for our colleagues, for young researchers and those from LMIC.
And in fact, the same goes for medical education, doesn't it, Keith? So you have actually a medical education track. So I think CUGH, and so we have published several abstracts from the conference on the medical education track. So we do try and cover it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Zoe. Zoe's point is spot on. We do have a separate track that we started this year for medical education. So thank you, Zoe, for the reminder. A question here concerns, it's from Prashant, and he wonders, Zoe, whether or not a systematic review of the prevalence of a disease, which is a priority public health problem in a place like South Asia, would you consider such a systematic review for publication?
Yes, is the short answer.
Great.
Yes, send it in. Thank you.
Great. And another question comes from Adamu. Adamu wants to know the importance of a covering letter in submitting a paper for publication. Is that a good thing? Any tips with regard to that?
That is a good question. Yes, I think that's very editor dependent. So some editors will just they want to let the article sort of kind of speak to them, so they'll just read the abstract and your manuscript, and perhaps pay lip service to the covering letter. Others I know actually do take that much more seriously. So I think it is worth putting some time into the covering letter. But you know, my argument would be the way you've written your paper, if you're sort of following the outline that I've been talking about, is about selling the paper to the editor. It's telling the editor why it's important, why you should publish this paper over others. So if you feel you haven't quite got to the nub of that in the article, then it's a good idea to try and make that even more clear in your covering letter. So I would, yeah, I think it's worth putting some time into that. Again, just to let the editor know why it is that you should prioritize this paper over somebody else's.
Great. And thanks everybody for the questions that you're sending in. They are fantastic. This question, Zoe, comes from Ali. And Ali wants to know about submitting a paper to different Lancet journals where there's overlap. So his question is, if you have a paper where there appears to be overlap between, say, Lancet Global Health, Planetary Health, Public Health, how do you choose?
Yeah, that's so. How does the author choose? I think what we, as I was saying to you earlier, Keith, we all the Lancet editors sit in the same office. We have one building here with all our editors in from all the journals. So if you have submitted to Lancet Global Health, and actually I think, this would be actually perfect for Lancet Planetary Health. I'll just go over to the Lancet Planetary Health editor and say, what do you think of this paper? And she might say, oh, it's great. So I'll then send an email to the author saying, would you like your paper considered by Lancet Planetary Health instead? And of course, the option is always up to the author. So I think essentially, if your paper could be submitted to several potentially Lancet journals, then it's always best to kind of maybe start with the highest impact one. So if it's about HIV, then send it to Lancet Infectious Diseases first. If they think it's a little bit niche for them, maybe they might show it to Lancet HIV or Lancet Global Health. If the population is more of interest than, say, the sort of virological aspects of it. So essentially, your paper will kind of get to the right journal, I think, if you submit it to any one of them. So yeah, we talk to each other.
Great. And so this is a very interesting sort of political question that Rohini is asking about trainees navigating authorship and co-authorship discussions with their mentors. Any advice that you can give to trainees with regard to how they navigate that delicate situation?
Yeah, that's really hard. So authorship issues. So I also, until very recently, sat on the Committee on Publication Ethics, and authorship disputes are something that come up time and time again, and really thorny. And often they will be, from individuals who think they should be on a paper and they've been denied authorship. And that's really hard for someone who's junior to challenge a senior person when they think they should have been on a paper. But I think the only consolation I can give is that we're on your side as editors. If you fulfill the criteria for authorship set out by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, then if a paper is submitted to the journal, and it's been submitted to the journal, and you're not an author on it, you are very within your rights to get in touch with the editor and to say, I should be an author on this paper. And then the editors will then get back to the main author and challenge them. And that could then become difficult for you. And that's very hard. But the editor will be on your side if you deserve to be an author. And we'll help you fight to get your name on that. And we may even involve the superior of that individual who might be being difficult. So and we've had some good outcomes actually from that sort of problem. So when the departmental head, say, or the head of research integrity at a university has been informed that there have been some difficulties, there's been a sort of widespread education program across the institution that's actually reminded supervisors about the responsibilities and the what the criteria are for authorship, and so that it can be useful. So I hope that's been some way helpful.
Great. Thank you, Zoe. There's a lot of very interesting and very specific questions that everybody is submitting. Concerning avoidable waste, so Chidozi would like to know, would it be considered wasteful if a study is done to see if the findings from a previous study is replicable in another setting?
I don't know. I think that would be valuable, as long as you had good reasons to think that the setting was suitably different from the original one, such that there was equipoise in the question. So if you really didn't know whether it was going to work in Asia when it had worked in Africa, then I think that's a good point there. But you would want to spell out again to the authors why it would be important to do it in that different population. What is different about that population? What's relevant to the research question that's different about that population? Maybe it's something to do with if it's a sanitation trial, it's something to do with the rate of open defecation in that country or something like that. It would have to be a legitimate reason for why you would have a hypothesis that it might be different in a different setting, and that you were trying to challenge that. So yeah, I think doing the same study in a different setting is not wasteful, as long as you can demonstrate why you think there's a legitimate reason why it might be different.
Thank you very much. And then for those 4% of articles, Zoe, that are accepted, Nadia wants to know if there's a common thread that amongst those articles that are published, a main thing that they have that others don't have, that enables them to get into the journal. I think you really answered a lot of that when you went through that process of the acceptance and rejection. But maybe you could just share from your years of starting the Lancet Global Health, what you found in the 4% of articles that you do publish, or sorry, that's the Lancet publishes 4% of what accepts. What you see as being the common thread amongst those articles that are published in journals.
Yeah, it's difficult to see a common thread, really. Again, it has to be something suitably novel, and that you could really see having an impact in a particular setting. So maybe it's going to affect some WHO guidelines. Maybe it's more of a national level thing. Yeah, they're those things where you really think, wow, this is important to have done this, and we can see what impact it may have, as I say, whether it's positive or negative. So yeah, difficult to find a real theme, and yeah, only 4% of papers in the Lancet get published. So I think, if you are rejected from the Lancet, one thing to take away is that you're in good company, because 96% of the other submissions have been rejected as well. So, especially for new researchers, I think one of the things I quite often say is that, maybe you have to be a bit realistic about whether the research that you're able to do as you're starting out on your journey as a researcher, is it realistic to want to publish that in a very high impact journal, or should you be building up from a lower level, a more local level, maybe a more specialist journal level, building your collaborations, getting your name out there, getting your publication record, and building up to something in a Lancet journal. So I think, it's it's a little bit unrealistic sometimes just to think, well, you know, any research, if it's written up in the right way, could go in the Lancet. It's a tough job to get in the Lancet, and lots of very respectable researchers have not done it. So don't be disheartened if it doesn't go into the Lancet. Maybe, you know, start somewhere that maximizes your chances of success. Build up those papers and those collaborations. Yeah, aim higher later, maybe.
Great, thanks. And Kemi has a question on a different part of what you spoke about concerning commentary, and what would be attractive from an editor's perspective in accepting a commentary piece. Could you expand on what would be a compelling commentary from your perspective as an editor?
Sure. I think if I saw something that was quite, the topicality is good, actually. So if in the first couple of lines of the commentary you can say, well, there's this meeting coming up, you know, in a couple of months, and it's very important that you know, the conveners of this meeting discuss this particular topic, maybe. That's something that might that will interest us. So we can think, well, that's, you know, that's topical. We can publish this to coincide with that meeting. That would be one thing. Something that we hadn't seen before. You know, so again, if you look at our content, if you have a topic that, you know, is something you really want to get off your chest, it's something that's maybe you know, it's a particular viewpoint you have, look through other journals, see whether anybody else has published anything else on it, and if not, then it's, you know, it's quite likely that we'll find it of interest, because, you know, we want to be bringing new ideas and new controversies maybe to our readers. So if something's not been out there yet in our pages, then that's another thing that will be attractive for us. Yeah, I think that's, again, something that you feel passionately about, that we can see you have a strong maybe personal interest in, and you have a strong kind of maybe advocacy line. You know, we published a paper, a commentary on Wednesday to coincide with World Malaria Day, and the authors were calling for the use of a particular anti-malarial drug in the first trimester of pregnancy. And that, you know, that was a very strong line that was of interest to us. We hadn't really seen that argument been made before. So again, we are looking for a little bit of novelty, maybe some topicality, and some passion.
Great. Thank you very much, Zoe. I think for those of you who are on, and please tell your colleagues to really sign up for the Lancet Global Health and the Lancet family of papers. You'll see that the whole Lancet family of papers do not shy away from controversy, and you push the envelope to make us think better, deeper, and further than we have done in the past. So doing exactly what great journals are supposed to do. Paul has a question, Zoe. It's a fairly simple question about the frequency of authorship. If a journal has published an author, is there some unwritten rule that somebody can only get it once a year, once every 2 years? What should people look at if they've actually had a paper published in a journal?
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, we try not to look at authorship too much. It's more to do with the content. So no, we definitely don't have a rule about you know, oh, so and so is published with us too much, unless maybe, I mean, you know, sometimes we do get serial letter writers. So, you know, at that, you know, if someone submitted maybe 4 letters in the last month and then another 4 the next month, that to an editor then starts to look a little bit desperate, like I really want to get something in your journal, it doesn't really matter what it is. So that puts us off a little bit from that, well, this is the important thing that I need to get in your journal. If you've actually got 1 million of them and you're going to bombard me with them, then I might start to get a little bit suspicious that you just wanted to get a thing published rather than you really had an important manuscript or viewpoint to get across. So Yeah, very occasionally, I think, if it's something, maybe it's more likely to be a letter or a commentary. If you submit oodles of them, we might start to notice and think, why are you submitting so many? But for a research article, I mean, no, unless of course, you know, you're submitting sort of 10 papers in 1 year, and these are all big studies, and you think, well, how have you actually managed to do that much research in that short amount of time? Again, that might make us a bit suspicious. But no, there's no sort of rationing or anything. It would be down to, if we saw somebody popping up again and again, it would be thinking, why are they popping up? Not oh, they've had their turn.
Great. And we're down to the last 4 minutes, and so I just want to give you a little bit of time to be able to wrap up if there are any other comments and points that you'd like to make. And again, on behalf of all of us at CUGH, I'd really like to thank you very much for doing this, and really thank all of you who are online right now for listening to Zoe's presentation. So Zoe, is there any closing comments that you'd like to make? Any last minute advice that you can give to the audience right now?
No, I think I'd like to thank everyone for joining. It's always very rewarding to give these talks, to kind of help in a small way I can, for people to get the important work that they have out there. Yeah, please do sign up for our free table of contents alerts. We'd love to have you on board. And if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask me, then I'm always on the end of email. So anybody who has another question is quite they must feel free to just drop me a line. So maybe we can put that my email address out with the slides and make that available. I'd be very happy to do that.
Great, thank you very much, Zoe. And it's worthwhile just for reinforcing again what Zoe mentioned, is that her presentation, this presentation, and her slides will be on CUGH's website by tomorrow night at cugh.org. I'd also encourage you to sign up again follow Lancet Global Health on Twitter, of course, all the other Lancet family of journals. Also, CUGH's Twitter handle is @CUGH and on our website, you can sign up for our bulletin. And in our bulletin, we put together a list of different journals that are useful for those involved in global health. So on behalf of all of us here at CUGH, again, Zoe, thank you very much for doing this. I'd like to thank Karen Lamb and Bilal Najjar and Arisa Koyama, Secretariat, for all the great work they do in putting on this webinar series. And to you, the attendees, thank you very much for tuning into this webinar in CUGH's series of global health webinars, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and have a wonderful day.